Okay, good evening everyone. What was the last discussion?
No.
Hello, I'm audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible. So last time we discussed the reducers, use reducer and all those things.
Okay,
And
okay,
middle
okay.
layers, React middle layers.
So today we will discuss how to use useReducer. Huh. Let's understand useReducer, how to use it. We will understand with one example. Okay. So what we will do, we will create one to-do application without using Redux by using useReducer. So let me do that then. Fine. So we will have a folder. We will have a folder called hooks. Do we have a folder called hook? I don't think we have. So inside components, I will create a folder called hooks. I'll create a folder called hooks, and inside that components, inside components, we will have hooks. Then inside hooks, I will call a file use reducer demo.js. Use reducer demo.js. And in center component, I'll add use reducer demo. We'll add use reducer demo. Use reducer demo. Okay. What are we going to do as part of this? First of all, let's see if use reducer demo is working. This is home component and use reducer demo is loaded. There is something wrong. Let me check. We have index. Inside index, we are using app. Let me go to app. In app, we are using routing. Okay. We are using routing. So what I will do, I'll comment this. I'll comment this for now. It should directly load use reducer demo. Yes, use reducer demo. And what we will learn as part of this, we will create one to do application using use reducer without using Redux. If we use Redux, what all things we need? We need store, right? What all things we need? We need
So reducer, action,
store, reducer, action,
and middle layer if we need
and
dispatcher.
dispatch, right? These are the things we need. Even in this example, we will get a flavor of Redux. Though it is not Redux, we will use the concept of Redux. So let's understand how to do it. First of all, we'll create initial values. Let's have some initial values. So this is my initial to-dos. Const initial to-dos equal to id1 to do 1 complete false, id2 title to do 2 complete true. This is my initial data. Then using this initial data, we will write a reducer function, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
So this is our initial
Store
data.
number, store number.
Using initial data, let's create a reducer. Now this is our reducer. And what is there in the reducer? Please understand. Const reducer equal to reducer takes state and action.
Master eventually.
Reducer takes state and action. If action dot type is add, then along with the state, add action payload. If it is delete, delete it. If it is toggle, toggle it. Otherwise, return the state. It is almost similar like reducer only, right? Isn't it?
Yes.
So we added a reducer also. We added a reducer. Now we can have a variable for next to do. We can have a variable for next to do. Then this is our component. In this component, we will get the state. How to get the state? In Redux application, how we used to get the state?
Use selector. Get something from the store.
Huh, use selector. But here, what we do, we will call use reducer by passing the reducer function and the data. When you call use reducer hook, when we call use reducer hook, when we call use reducer hook, when we call use reducer hook by passing reducer function and initial data, it will return two things. Whenever we call use reducer hook by passing reducer function and state, what it returns? It returns two things. One is to do, one is dispatch. Okay. Now, what we will do with that to do? To do, to do list using use reducer. Hmm. Now, these to dos will have an array of two data. Then we can iterate that to do array. We can iterate that to do array and we can display here, right? We know how to do that. So let's add that. Let's add that piece of code which iterates our array and prints here. Okay. Then we will have actions also. Yeah. For now, uh, let's not have actions like this action, this action. Let's not have. If we can add those action creators also, let's add the action creators also. To add the action creators, we will add these three action creators: add to do, handle complete, and delete to do. These are the three actions. So once we add these actions also, it should be working now. Use reducer is not imported, it seems. Use reducer. What is the error? Let's see. It says my ref1 is not defined. Okay. My ref1 is not defined. So how my ref1 is not defined? Let's see. So here my ref1 is not defined. To define that, let's use my ref1 equal to useRef. My ref1 equal to useRef. What happened? Useref is not defined. Useref may be not imported. Useref. it's working fine now. See, we have one input box. Here we can add to do 3, add to do, another to do is added. To do 4, another to do is added. Toggle to do, it is toggled. Delete to do, it is deleted. Toggled. Deleted. Okay. If you want to understand how it is done, let me walk you through the code. Please understand. We have one array of initial values. Then we have a reducer. Then in our functional component, we are calling useReducer hook. When we call useReducer hook, useReducer hook is expecting two things. One is a reducer, one is initial data. By passing reducer and initial data, we can collect two things. One is the state, the other one is dispatch method. Then we have three action creators. Three action creators are add new to do, handle complete, delete to do. These three are action creators. If you call add new to do by passing the title, it will give you one object. It will give you one action object. Will dispatch action object. If you call handle complete method, it will dispatch toggle. If you call delete to do, it will dispatch type delete ID. There are three action dispatchers. Then in HTML, what are we doing? We have we have one input box, one button click. We are calling add new to do method by passing myref1.current.value. Then we have to do's.map, iterating and getting one to do for every to do. For every to do, we are showing one checkbox, one span, and one button. On click of this checkbox, it is changing. It is changing handle complete. On click of this button, it is calling delete to do. Please go through this requirement. Go through this file and let me know if anything is not clear.
So this use reducer is also similar like Redux, only instead of having it a reducer file, action file, we put all of them together in the same thing and use the function called use reducer with the initial state and the other is reducer as the parameters we send to it.
Yes, correct.
So
But
even
this
if we
state,
are
right?
using this in
This
the
state,
project,
yes, we are using this in project also.
even if it is a huge one, we still put the action reducer in the same file and use
No,
the
no,
use
no,
reducer.
no.
Okay. In that case, we would differentiate the same in the similar way like Redux. We would
For
mention it with
sure.
action
Yeah,
and reduce. Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Is it clear or any question? You want me to do one more example?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Use reducer demo 2. Okay, I'll show you one counter example. It will be easy to understand. Okay. So suppose uh, we will have here 1H2 counter example using use reducer hook. Okay, here we will have a div in this. We will have h1. In this h1, print counter is count. Counter is count. Then after this, we will have three buttons. Button, button, incre, hmm, increment, decrement, increment, reset. Fine. First of all, to fetch the data, what is the hook we use? Use reducer, right?
Yes.
What is the hook we use? Use reducer. How to use reducer? What is the syntax? Use reducer will take how many arguments? Counter, counter reducer and initial data, right? And what it will return? Count and dispatch, right? Is it clear so far?
Count is the state.
Count is the state, correct. Is it clear? Yeah. So what is counter reducer? Let's write counter reducer. Const counter reducer equal to state and action switch action dot type. If action dot type is increment, return state plus 1. Case decrement, return state minus 1. Case reset, return 0. Default, return state. Did you understand the reducer part? Did you understand the reducer part? Now, this program should be working fine. You see, this is working fine. Counter is 0. Now, what we have to do, we have to do, what we have to do now? We have to add action for these three things, right? So on click of this button, what we will do? What we will do? We will dispatch one action, right? What we will do? Dispatch, dispatch. What we will dispatch? We will dispatch one object. In that object, there will be type. What is the type? Increment. Do you see? Decrement. This is a decrement. On click, increment. On click, reset. Now if you go and see, counter value is 0. When we say increment, it is incrementing. When we say decrement, it is decrementing. When we say reset, it is resetting. Any question, any doubt here? Tell me. we should have a reducer. Please understand. We should have a reducer. Using that reducer and initial value, we should call useReducer function. UseReducer function will return two things. One is the state, the other one is the dispatch. That state variable we are printing here. Then using this dispatch method, we are dispatching action object. Are we clear? Any question?
No, sir, it's fine.
Okay, so this is useReducer. Then the next hook we will discuss is use memo. Use memo.
What about this?
So we will go and create. We will go and create one more file inside hooks. The file name is use memo. Use memo example one. Use memo example one. What is use memo? You will understand now. Use memo example one. What is this use memo? Let's understand. Use memo. Please understand. This is very important hook. The functions called inside component are invoked on every state change. The functions called inside component are re-invoked on every state change. Every time the state changes, the functions will be re-invoked. If we want the functions should be called only on page load and not on every state changes, then for that function use memo should be used. If you want, you have a function inside your component, but that function should be called only once on page load, not every time there is a state change. Better you use use memo hook. Use memo hook returns a memoized value. The use memo hook accepts second parameter to declare the dependencies. The function will only run when its dependencies are changed. The main difference between useMemo and useCallback is that useMemo returns a memoized value and useCallback returns a memoized function. UseMemo returns memoized value, useCallback returns memoized function. Let me explain you where we can use.
Small question, Sanjay. Like this use memo, it is somewhat looks like use effect actually. So we are anyway sending.
Yeah, it looks like use effect because it takes dependency array only because of that.
Yes, and not only
Yeah,
that, like if we are giving empty dependency array in use effect, then it will be called on the page load only, right? So,
correct.
so it's similar. Then why we are going with the concept with use memo?
Yeah. We'll get to know in next few minutes. Yeah, just 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes. Hmm. Okay, I'll tell you what is the use of it. I'll tell you. Give me a second. See, suppose we have a plain function written like this. Expensive calculation. It's a plain function. When you write this function like this, it will be called every time there is a state change, which is not good. If you don't want to call this function every time there is a state change, better you use memo. Yeah, let me show you how to use memo. After this example only, it will be more clear. Let's understand this. I'll explain this program. Let's understand the UI first of all. Okay, this this component has two state variables. This component has two state variables. One is to do, one is count. When I click on add to do, this to do you see how much time it is taking to add? Again, see, I have already clicked. After some time, it adds a new to do. Clicked. After 5 seconds, it adds a to do. Count. I have already clicked. After 2 seconds, it is incrementing. Count. After some time, the count is getting incremented. You know why? Let's understand why. I will explain. Don't worry. Please wait for next 2 minutes. Let me completely explain this example. Const count and set count equal to use state 0. We have a count variable. Const to do's set to do's equal to use state of empty array. We have one to do's state variable. There are two state variables, count and to do's. Now, there is no reason why I have written this function. Just assume you have a function. You have a function. The function name is expensive calculation. You want to call this function on page load. Your intention is to call this function on page load, and it is doing something. And in this expensive calculation, intentionally, I have written a for loop. Expensive calculation equal to, say, calculating, then run this for loop for 1 lakh time, then return the number. Okay, just to delay my calculation. Just to delay my calculation, I have added this logic. So what is happening on page load? On page load, it is calling calculating function. And again, whenever I click on this count increment, it is calculating. Whenever I click on add to do, it is calculating. So basically, this function, if you write any function in your functional component, if you write any normal function inside your functional component, every time the state change happens, this function will be invoked again and again and again. This function call will happen every time there is a state change. When this function is getting called,
In set state.
yeah. So whenever there is a state change happens, this expensive calculation function will be called automatically. Okay. Not only this, any function that you write inside your functional component, they all will be called every time there is a state change and every time there is a page load. I mean component load. Every time the component loads and every time state changes, the functions written inside our functional components will be invoked. Because of that, what is happening? We see a lag. We see a lag here to update the state. You see, I have already clicked add to do. After some time, it is adding. I have already clicked the increment button. After some time, the count is getting incremented, right? Why? Because the state update happens after the expensive calculation method is done. Do you understand what is the problem here? Do you understand what is the problem here?
Because it is having to execute this function, it is taking delay or lag.
Yeah.
If it has 2-3 more functions, it will wait until those functions are executed and then the UI gets updated.
Correct. That's true. Huh. If you write another function, let's say sorry. print print hello is a function. If print hello is a function and you are calling print hello function, now let me write print hello also. Let me write print hello here. Const print hello is equal to const print hello equal to for I equal to 1, I less than or equal to this much, console dot log hello.
You're getting code, I mean, in the background, in the gray, you're getting it by itself. How? So,
That is tab 9. There is one extension called tab 9. If you
okay.
install, it will help you a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. Now what happens on page load? On page load, you see the hello component is getting called, right? Hello component is getting called. Hello function is getting called, right?
Yes.
Huh. If I reduce it to my God, can I cancel it? Localhost
You
3000.
It's fine, I guess.
It is. It became on responsive. It is not responding now. Huh. So on application load, it calls calculating function. It will also call hello method, right? Isn't it? It is calling hello method also. Now, whenever we try to increment the value of any state, whenever we try to increment the value of any state, again both of them will be called. What are those functions? One is calculating, one is expensive calculation, one is print hello. These two functions will be called for every state change. Huh. Let me increment count. When I increment count, this expensive calculation is calling, hello is again calling, and until unless this hello function is not done, the count value will not be increased. It waits for 5 minutes, and after 5 minutes, it is changing it to 1. Do you see? Do you see? Hmm?
Yes, yes.
yes, yes.
I click the button again. Look at here. I click the button. After 2 hours, this count value will be 2. See? It is calling a function. Until unless that function is not done, count value will not be 2. Do you see that?
Yes,
Now count value is 2, right? Are we
yeah,
calling this print hello method anywhere? Only one place we are calling, right? Here.
yes.
Hmm.
But this print hello, how frequently it is being called?
Every state change means every increment.
Huh. Not only increment, even add to do is one state change. So even then it will call, right? When you click on add to do,
Yeah,
I have already clicked that button, but after 2 months, a new to do will be added, right?
So, yeah.
You see? Huh? You see what is happening?
yeah,
Sometimes you have a requirement. Yeah, I have to call this function. I cannot avoid, but I want to call this function only once on page load. But I don't want to call them. I don't want to call them. I'll delete that print hello one, guys. Huh? Or else let it be. Let it be, but at least I'll delete 1 0. Huh. Now, what is our expectation? Our expectation is that this expensive calculation and print hello should be called only once on page load. On every state change, they should not be called. If we have such requirement, then what we will do? What we will do in that case, we will use memo. What we will do, we will
Use memo.
use memo. What we will use memo. For that, what I'm doing, I'm writing const calculation equal to use memo. Inside use memo, pass your function expensive calculation, and make it empty array. When you make it empty array, how frequently it will be called? Only on page load. Empty array means
Only on page load.
Only on page load.
now if you go and see here, this will be called only on page load. This calculation is calling only once, right? Yeah,
Yes, click on one increment.
yeah. When I increment, only hello is calling. If I comment this, let me delete it. I don't need. Huh. See, calculating is called on page load. When I increment, you can see how fast it is incrementing, right?
Yes.
Is it calling the calculating function?
No.
No.
If I add a new to do, is it fast? Is it quick?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it calling that function?
No.
No.
No. So if you want a function should be called only on page load, use memo and that function name. If you want to call this function on page load plus every time the count value changes, then pass that here. So how frequently this expensive calculation method will be called?
Huh?
On change of the count, state count.
Yeah, it will be called 2 times
On load also.
on page load, on load also for sure, and whenever we change the count data. Is it calling? Is it calling on every count
Yes.
change? But if I add to do, is it calling?
No.
No, right? So use memo will take a function which should be called only once on page load. And the second one is array. In this array, if you don't pass anything, if it is empty array, this function will be called on page load. In this array, if you pass count, it will be called on page load also. And every time the count variable changes also. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Use memo taking only single function or multiple function.
Single function. If you have multiple function, you have to repeat it again and again.
Total.
Yeah. Is it clear, guys? What is use memo?
Yes.
Until unless you use it, you will not feel the difference.
But still, I'm like, why we are not using user fee?
How it is related to use effect? It is not at all related to use effect.
But in
Let's say
if we
you have a
use,
utility function. You have one utility function that you want to call, that you want to call, that you want to call on page load, and every time there is a state change. Okay, and it will return a value also. It returns a value. This use memo returns a memoized value. Memoized value means it will remember the value and it will return to your calculation variable.
that we can do it now in the use effect, we will give the dependency variable like this count, and we will declare the whole function inside the use effect only. Then it will return whatever we want, right?
No, we cannot relate use memo with use effect. We cannot relate it with use effect.
But we can do the same task in use effect as well, right? So if someone will ask like why we specifically we want to use memo, in that case, what is the main difference between the use effect and this use memo?
There is no, we cannot relate use effect and use memo at all. When we, why we use memo, to answer that, we can say if we have a function and uh, that function is invoked every time there is a state change, that hits the performance of the application. If we want to invoke the function only on page load or only when one of the state changes, we can use memo there. Is it clear, guys? Did you get it? So when you write this statement, it is simply we are calling the function. When we are simply calling the function without use memo, what happens? Every time there is a state change, on page load, it will be called. Also, when there is a state change, that expensive calculation function will be called. Only after that, your state will be updated. So it takes time to
আমাকে একটু
update your
ভিডিওটা
state.
দেবে?
You click here,
হ্যাঁ,
your state is updated after some time. If you want, your function should be called only once, or when the state change happens, better use memo like this. Okay. Yeah. This is all about use memo. The next callback or next hook we will discuss is use callback.
সঞ্জয় কিন্তু কোনো ডিফারেন্সই দেখাতে পারলো না।
Use callback example 1. What
আমাকে
is
লিখতে
use
হবে।
memo? What is use callback? Use memo and use callback are related only. So we can relate use memo and use callback. Use callback and use memo can be related. Huh. So let's understand what is use callback. Use callback hook returns a memoized callback function. Use callback hook returns a memoized callback function. Use callback hook only runs when one of its dependency update. It's similar like use memo. Use callback should be used. Use callback should be used. Should be used to prevent a component from re-rendering unless its props have changed. Unless its props have changed, the component should not be re-rendered. When a function is passed as a props, when a data is passed as a props, that we can control using memo. We have already discussed that. But when a function is passed as a props from parent component to child component, please understand, when a function is passed as a props from parent to child component, child component re-renders even if no props data changes, even though the child is a memo component. See, we already know what is memo component. We already know what is memo component. In memo component, what happens? In memo component, what happens? When we use react.memo, when there is no change, the child component will not be re-rendered. But yeah, I'll show you that example. Give me a second. Are you guys able to recall what we discussed as part of memo component? What is memo component?
I think when we wrap the component with memo, then it will not re-render if any unrelated state changes from the parent. Yes.
Yeah, correct. When child component uses react.memo, and when the props data doesn't change, the child component should not be re-rendered, right? Yeah. Now, now, even if the child component is a memo component and parent component is not passing data, rather it is passing a method. If parent component is passing a method to child component, even though the child component is a memo component, every time there is a state change, the child component will be re-rendered. To address that, we have to use callback. When a function is passed as a props from parent to child component, the child component re-renders even if no props data changes. And even though the child is a memo component, because the function that gets passed as a props always gets a new reference every time there is a state change in the parent component. Okay, let me show you how use callback looks like. Okay, suppose suppose let's say this is our this is our component. The main component name is use callback example. Use callback example. Use callback example is having use callback example is having uh, two set of data. Use callback example is parent here, which is having count data to do data. There is an increment button which is incrementing the count. There is a add to do function. Hmm. There is add to do function. There is add to do function. Const const add to do add to do hmm, add to do, and this add to do set to do's we are calling set to do's function. In set to do's we are doing like this. Okay, fine. Now please understand, use callback example one is the parent component who has count and to do's state. There is one increment method, there is one add to do method. Here we are calling a component. The component name is to do's component. So let's create a to do's component here. Let's create to do's component here only, in this example only. So here, hmm, no need to export default memo const to do. Hmm. I'll create a to do's component here. Give me a second. I'll create a to do's component here. To do's dot js, and this is to do's component. This is to do's component. In this to do's, to this to do's component, what are we passing? Okay, please understand. In this example, there are two components involved. The parent component is use callback example who has two state data, then setter for count and to do. Then we are using a component called to do's, passing to do's array and passing add to do function. Passing to do's array and passing add to do function. Now there is a count also, and we are incrementing the count. When we go to do's component, in to do's component, we get two things: to do array and add to do function. Here we are showing all the to do's. On click, we are calling add to do method. Please look at here. Use callback example we will use in center component. We will use callback. Yeah. So maybe to do is not imported. Let me import to do. To do's. Use state is not defined. Use state. Huh. It's fine. See, this is this is parent component. This is child component. In parent component, whenever I'm incrementing the count, I'm incrementing the count. Why child is getting rendered? Can you tell me? We are not passing count to the component, right? Are we passing count data to the component? Hmm?
No.
No. What are we passing? We are passing only to do array, not count. So why child is getting called when counter is getting incremented? Because of this function. You know, if I delete this, then it won't be called again and again. See, child got rendered. When I increment, is it calling? No. When we pass a function, where is that? Where is that to do's? When we pass a function, it's a props to another component. Every time this component re-renders, this function is considered as a new function. So when this is considered as a new function, the child component understands that, okay, I got a new value. Okay, if I got a new value, the child component will be re-rendered. Even though it is memo component, it will be re-rendered if the parent is passing a function to child component. Is this clear? Can you tell me what is your understanding? I will ask randomly. Aviram, Nitish, Nishant, Sunil, are you guys able to follow me?
सर
What is your understanding? Can you tell me? What do you understand?
या सर यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है कि अभी आप रिएक्ट डॉट मेमो लगा रहे हैं तभी भी फंक्शन पास हो रहा है वो टाइम पे ये रिकॉल हो रहा है तो
Correct.
अभी ये हुक लगाने से इनके फंक्शन पास होगा तो भी रिकॉल नहीं होगा
हाँ, actually क्या हो रहा है? If there is a child component तभी re-render होना चाहिए अगर the props are changing, right?
यस
So to stop re-rendering the child component when props are not changing, we have one option called memo.
यस
मेमो यूज हुआ है, फिर भी ये चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट बार बार रेंडर होता है, क्योंकि फ्रॉम पेरेंट वी आर पासिंग ए फंक्शन। अगर एक फंक्शन पास कर रहे हो, every time this component is called, this variable will get a new function reference. So every time this code is getting executed line number 15, it will consider it as a new function. It's a new function, new function, new function. Because of that, the child component is getting re-rendered. The child component is getting rendered again and again and again. Why? Because the parent component is passing, parent component is passing, parent component is passing.
Function.
What parent component is passing?
A function. Add to do function.
Add to do function. Yes. So how to overcome that? To overcome that, what we have to do? We have to use callback. Whether you add a new to do or you increment the counter, every time the child component is getting rendered. If you want, if the parent component wants, okay, अगर मैं एक फंक्शन पास करूं चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट को, फिर भी चाइल्ड कंपोनेंट शुड नॉट बी री-रेंडर्ड अगेन एंड अगेन unnecessarily, then we can use callback. And how are we using that? We have a method const add to do, जो लिखा हुआ था यहाँ पे उसको रैप करो एक यूज कॉलबैक में। const add to do is equal to use callback, inside use callback write that function। जो फंक्शन हम खाली लिख रहे थे उसको अभी एक यूज कॉलबैक फंक्शन के अंदर लिखेंगे। if we write that function 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 inside use callback, the child component will not be rendered again and again, even if a function is passed as prompts. Now, if you go and see, use callback is not imported. Fine. Child component will be rendered only once जब page load हो रहा है. When I increment counter, now child is not getting rendered. This is the benefit of using use callback. Are we clear? Just extra one line we have to add.
Yes, here again the dependency array will be similarly like the use effect and use memo.
Yes, yes. If it is empty, only on page load it will load. If it is having one value, on page load and on state change it will call. Okay? Yeah. This is use callback example.
If we are having Redux implemented in a project, can we use useReducer in that?
No need to use. We won't have a requirement to use useReducer if Redux is already used. Redux is much more powerful than useReducer. We will not come across any situation where we have to use. Syntactically, it is fine. You can use, but there will be no requirement to use. Okay.
But this use memo and use callback, these are most asked interview questions actually. Means though we won't use it properly in our project, but this these two things they will definitely ask in interview.
They will definitely ask because we don't know. We are not using, but see, agar if you have a function here, you never know how many times that function is being called until unless you see a performance hit.
Yes.
So you write a function, in the background that function is getting called again and again. If you have added a console log, then only you will realize that, oh, why this function is getting called again and again. If you don't have a console log, you don't even know that that function is getting called 100 times. So how can you stop doing that?
For that, we should go with useMemo, and we
Use
should give the
memo.
dependency of that particular state
Yeah.
which we are changing inside the function, so that it will be called
Hmm.
only once
Hmm.
whenever the state
Yes.
change of that.
There is another hook called use ID. There is another hook called use ID. Use ID is not that important, but still we will discuss that. Use ID. Use ID. Let's
Delete the
discuss.
capital M.
Mhm.
Capital M.
Yeah.
No.
So use ID. Let's understand. Use memo.
কি হয়েছে?
We'll create one more file.
ইন্টারভিউ?
Use
হ্যাঁ, ইন্টারভিউ।
ID example one.
যখনই জিজ্ঞাসা করবো তুমি রিয়াক্ট হুক সম্বন্ধে জানো, তখনই গিয়ে লোকে ইচ্ছে করে ওটা ধরে যাতে লোকে বলতে না পারে। আর যদি বলতে পারে তাহলে তো মহান হবে।
We are left with one or two sessions, guys, with our training. Let me know if something is pending, if you are expecting something.
And from Redux, also you are pushing into the same page where we had.
No, 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 no. They are different repositories. Maybe I'll share in WhatsApp. I did share, right? Two projects.
Yes, yes, React Redux. If you
Yeah,
can go to
yeah,
Sanjay Samantra repository and search React Redux, then also you will
yeah,
get.
Then I'll look for
yeah,
it. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. Okay, what is use ID? Use ID is a hook for generating unique IDs that can be used in HTML elements. Use ID should not be used for generating keys in a list. If you want to create list of key, don't use ID. But for other IDs, we can use ID. Key should be generated from your data. If you are using employee, employee ID should be key. If you are using student, student dot roll number should be your ID. Okay, let's say, let's say you have a level and a input box. You have one level, you have one level and one input box. And whatever ID you want to use in the label, the same ID you want to use in the input box. We know this, right? Level HTML for ID. What is this ID? This ID is const ID is equal to use ID, use ID, use ID. So if you call use ID hook, it will give you some ID. That ID better you use here and you use here so that it will be same. Now, if I go and run, I have one level, I have one checkbox. If I go and see, both of them should have same ID. This is having ID colon R0 colon. This is having ID colon R0 colon. Do you see? So when you click here, your checkbox is clicked. When you click here, your checkbox is unchecked. Do you understand? This is to generate ID.
So because of having the same ID, even if we click on label and input, it's getting checked and answered. Is it for that?
Yes. This is HTML functionality.
Wow.
If you use the same ID in level and checkbox, you go and click on the level, your checkbox will be selected.
Yeah. In case of common, if we are using the same ID for some elements, in that case, we have to use ID.
Correct. Okay. Next, if you have if you want to create multiple IDs, for multiple IDs in the same component, you can append a suffix using the same ID. Suppose you have first name, last name, and all. You have first name and last name. Then, then better, better you use ID plus first name, ID plus last name. So this ID will be unique. ID is colon R0 colon. After that, we are adding first name, last name. So here the ID is colon R0. Here the ID is colon R0 hyphen first name, colon R0 hyphen last name. If you open Flipkart, Amazon website, you will never see ID like ABC, first name, ID last name. No, they will not do like that. This is how the IDs will look like, right? So here, when you click first name text, there will be a focus added. When you click here, there will be a focus added. Do you see? Hmm? Is it clear what is the use of use ID?
Yes.
Take a look at this example. It's not very critical or very important, but we should know at least. It is very simple also. If you don't know this, better you know this. If you spend 5 minutes time, you know a hook. If somebody asks in the interview, you should be able to answer. It's not very difficult to remember also. It's one line here. You create one ID using use ID method. It will give you one ID. Either you use that ID directly or you use ID plus something. ID plus something. Let me commit all the changes. You should be able to see hooks.
ওরু তুমি আজ এই সেশনটা রেকর্ড করোনি?
Yeah, the changes are committed and pushed. You should be able to see all these files in GitHub now. So today we discussed
Sir, and
use
push
callback.
updated files, notes files as well, sir. Please push updated notes files.
Yeah, updated notes also I will update. Git status. Git add. Yeah, done. So please practice all these things, the things we discussed today. Tomorrow we will create a tomorrow we will create a custom hook.